The sun-bleached plains of Nevada stretched endlessly before Lillian Sutton as the stage-coach rattled toward Yerington, her heart as heavy as the dust-caked luggage at her feet. She clutched her brother's letter in trembling fingers, the cruel words blurring through unshed tears. "You'll work for Vaughn Whitaker until Father's debt is paid, or we lose everything." The year was 1882, and at 22, Lillian had never imagined she would be traded away like cattle to appease her brother's poor gambling decisions. After their parents' death 3 years prior, Thomas had taken control of their modest farm outside Carson City, only to squander what little they had at card tables and saloons. Now she was to be a servant to a man rumored to be the cruelest rancher in Lyon County. As the stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of Yerington's only hotel, Lillian smoothed her faded blue dress and squared her shoulders. The driver, a weathered old man with kind eyes, helped her down. "Miss Sutton," a tall man approached, his face half hidden beneath the brim of a dark Stetson. "I'm Oscar, Mr. Whitaker's foreman. He sent me to collect you." Lillian nodded, unable to find her voice as Oscar loaded her trunk into a waiting wagon. The journey to Whitaker Ranch passed in tense silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sagebrush-dotted landscape. The main house came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch, far grander than Lillian had expected. Several outbuildings, a large barn and corrals filled with horses, completed the scene. It was a kingdom unto itself, isolated from town by miles of rugged terrain. "Mr. Whitaker is expecting you in his study," Oscar said as he helped her down. "First door on the right once you enter." Lillian stood frozen on the dusty drive, clutching her small handbag. "What exactly am I to do here?" she finally asked. Oscar's expression softened slightly. "Whatever Mr. Whitaker requires, miss. He's particular about how things are done." With that cryptic warning, he carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was surprisingly elegant: polished wood floors, expensive furnishings, landscape paintings in gilt frames. Lillian approached the study door, her knock sounding feeble even to her own ears. "Enter." The voice was deep and commanding. Lillian pushed open the heavy oak door to find a man standing by a window, his back to her. Tall and broad-shouldered, he cut an imposing figure in a tailored black vest and white shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal tanned forearms. "Miss Sutton, I presume." He turned, and Lillian's breath caught. Vaughn Whitaker was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sharp features and penetrating gray eyes. A thin scar traced his jawline, disappearing into dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Yes, sir," she managed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He assessed her coldly. "Your brother Thomas owes me $800, an impressive sum for a fool with no sense. He offered your services to settle part of that debt." "I'm aware, Mr. Whitaker." "Are you?" Vaughn circled his desk, trailing fingers across the polished surface. "And are you aware that I run the most profitable cattle operation in 3 counties because I tolerate nothing less than excellence? That I've dismissed hands for the smallest infractions? That I expect absolute obedience from everyone who works for me?" Lillian swallowed hard. "My brother explained you have a reputation." A humorless smile touched Whitaker's lips. "Did he also explain that your position here is conditional? That if I find your work unsatisfactory, your brother's debt remains, and I'll still collect what he owes one way or another?" "He did not." "Of course not." Vaughn sat, gesturing to a chair across from him. "You'll serve as my housekeeper. My previous one left rather abruptly. You'll clean, cook, manage the household accounts, and ensure everything runs smoothly. You'll have Sundays to yourself unless I say otherwise." Your room is upstairs, last door on the left. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is your contract. 1 year of service clears half your brother's debt. 2 years, the full amount. You'll receive a small stipend for personal necessities. Lillian scanned the document, her stomach sinking. And if I refuse, you won't. His certainty was chilling. Your brother made it clear what would happen to your family farm if this arrangement falls through. With trembling fingers, Lillian signed the contract, feeling as though she were signing away her very freedom. Mrs. Caldwell will show you to your room and explain your duties. You begin tomorrow at dawn. Vaughn returned to the window, dismissing her without another glance. Lillian found the housekeeper waiting in the hallway, a stout woman with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes. "Come along, child," she said quietly. "Let me show you where you'll be staying." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Her trunk had been placed at the foot of the bed. "He's not as terrible as they say," Mrs. Caldwell offered when Lillian remained silent. "Demanding, yes, exacting, certainly, but not cruel for cruelty's sake, just wounded somehow." She patted Lillian's arm. "Rest now. Tomorrow comes early at Whitaker Ranch." Sleep eluded Lillian that night. She unpacked her meager belongings, weeping silently as she placed her mother's treasured silver hairbrush on the dresser, the one possession Thomas hadn't managed to pawn. How had her life come to this? Indentured to a cold-eyed stranger because of her brother's vices, dawn broke with unforgiving brightness. Lillian dressed quickly in her simplest work dress and followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen where Mrs. Caldwell waited. "Mr. Whitaker breaks his fast at 6 sharp," the older woman explained, demonstrating how to prepare his preferred breakfast. "He takes coffee black, eggs over easy but not runny, bacon crisp, and toast with peach preserves. Never strawberry, he detests strawberries." The morning passed in a whirlwind of instruction. Lillian learned the layout of the sprawling house, the schedule for laundry, Mr. Whitaker's exacting standards for everything from how his shirts were to be pressed to the precise temperature of his evening bath. "The previous girl lasted 3 weeks," Mrs. Caldwell confided. "Burst into tears when he reprimanded her for using too much starch in his collars and fled the next morning." "I won't have that luxury," Lillian murmured, memorizing the complex rotation for polishing the silver. "No, I don't suppose you will." The housekeeper's eyes softened with sympathy. "Best piece of advice I can give, don't take his moods personally. The ranch is everything to him. The rest of us are just fixtures." Lillian met Vaughn again at dinner, which he took alone in the formal dining room. She served each course with shaking hands, acutely aware of his scrutiny. "The soup is oversalted," he said after the first spoonful, "and the bread is stale. I apologize, Mr. Whitaker. I'll do better tomorrow." He looked up, studying her face. "Your brother mentioned you were educated at Miss Holloway's seminary for young ladies in Sacramento. Is that correct?" Lillian nodded. "For 2 years before my parents died. Yet you can't prepare a simple soup." "Domestic skills weren't emphasized as much as literature and music," she admitted, cheeks burning with humiliation. "Music?" His eyebrow arched. "You play piano, sir, and I sing a little." Something flickered in his eyes, interest perhaps, or a memory before the cold mask returned. "The piano in the parlor hasn't been touched in years. See that it stays that way." He pushed away his plate. "I won't be requiring dessert." The next days established a grueling routine. Lillian rose before dawn to prepare Vaughn's breakfast, spent mornings cleaning, afternoons on laundry or mending, and evenings preparing dinner. Every task was performed under Mrs. Caldwell's watchful eye until the older woman deemed her competent. "You're a quick study, Mrs." Caldwell remarked on Lillian's fifth day as they folded sheets. Most girls would be in tears by now. I can't afford tears, Lillian replied, smoothing crisp linen with practiced motions. Her first true test came a week later when Mrs. Caldwell fell ill with a fever. Lillian found herself solely responsible for the entire household, from Vaughn's meals to managing the ranch's domestic accounts. Mrs. Caldwell keeps the ledgers in the second drawer of her desk, Vaughn informed her over breakfast. I expect them balanced by dinner. The ledgers proved bewilderingly complex. Hours later, frustrated tears threatened as Lillian struggled to reconcile columns of figures detailing everything from flour purchases to payments for the Chinese laundry in town. Having difficulties, Vaughn's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway of Mrs. Caldwell's small office, watching her with those penetrating eyes. No, sir, she lied, hastily wiping away a stray tear. Everything's fine. He approached, scanning the open ledger. You've listed the mercantile bill twice and forgotten to account for the McCleary wages entirely. Lillian's shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry. Mathematics was never my strongest subject. To her surprise, Vaughn pulled up a chair beside her. Look here, he said, his voice softer than she'd heard before. Each entry needs to be categorized properly, household expenses separate from ranch operations. For the next hour, he guided her through the process, explaining each step with unexpected patience. His shoulder occasionally brushed hers as he reached for the inkwell, and Lillian found herself distracted by the clean scent of his shaving soap and the warmth of his body so close to hers. There, he said finally. Do you understand now? Yes, thank you, Mr. Whitaker. He studied her face, something unreadable in his expression. You've managed well in Mrs. Caldwell's absence, better than I expected. The faint praise warmed her more than it should have. I'm trying my best. See that you continue to do so. He stood abruptly, the brief moment of connection broken. I'll be having guests for dinner tomorrow night, 3 cattlemen from Carson City. Prepare accordingly. The dinner party loomed as a monumental challenge. Lillian spent the next day in a frenzy of preparation, polishing silver, preparing an elaborate meal, arranging flowers from the small kitchen garden. With Mrs. Caldwell still confined to bed, she would be serving alone. The evening began well enough. Lillian had dressed in her best black dress, her copper-red hair pinned neatly beneath a white cap. The first courses were served without incident as the men discussed cattle prices and water rights. Disaster struck with the main course. As Lillian leaned to place a platter of roast beef before one of the guests, his hand deliberately brushed against her waist. Startled, she jerked away, sending the platter crashing to the floor. Clumsy girl, the man exclaimed with false concern, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. I'm so sorry, Lillian stammered, dropping to her knees to clean the mess, mortification burning through her. Leave it. Vaughn's voice cut through the room like a whip. Mr. Preston, I'll thank you to keep your hands to yourself in my home. The guest reddened. It was an accident, Whitaker. The girl's overreacting. Was it? Vaughn's tone was dangerously quiet. Because from where I sit, it appeared quite intentional. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Lillian remained frozen, pieces of broken china in her trembling hands. Miss Sutton, please bring the dessert course, Vaughn said evenly. And then you may retire for the evening. Lillian served the apple tart mechanically, then fled to the kitchen where she finally allowed tears of humiliation to fall. She was still there an hour later when heavy footsteps approached. Vaughn stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The mess has been cleared. My guests have departed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitaker. I'll pay for the broken china from my wages. That won't be necessary. He hesitated, then added, "Preston is known for taking liberties with female staff. I should have warned you." Lillian looked up in surprise. "You're not angry, not with you." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride." A faint smile touched his lips. "Pride heals quickly enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "You handled yourself with dignity tonight, Miss Sutton. That's commendable." The unexpected praise lingered in Lillian's mind as she prepared for bed. Perhaps Vaughn Whitaker wasn't quite the tyrant her brother had described. Strict and demanding, certainly, but there had been something like protectiveness in his defense of her tonight. The next morning, Lillian found a small package beside her breakfast plate, a delicate china teacup painted with wildflowers. No note accompanied it, but Mrs. Caldwell, recovered enough to join her, smiled knowingly. "He rode into town at first light," the housekeeper said, pouring coffee. "Never known him to bring back gifts before." "It's hardly a gift," Lillian protested, though her fingers caressed the fine porcelain. "Just a replacement for what was broken." Mrs. Caldwell's knowing look spoke volumes. As spring yielded to summer, Lillian settled into life at Whitaker Ranch. The work remained demanding, but she found unexpected satisfaction in running the household efficiently. Vaughn remained formal, but the edge of coldness gradually softened. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. One sweltering July afternoon, Lillian was hanging laundry when frantic shouting erupted from the direction of the corrals. A horse had broken free. Men were scattering, and at the center of the chaos stood Vaughn, trying to control a massive stallion rearing on its hind legs. Lillian watched in horror as the horse's hooves lashed out, catching Vaughn squarely in the chest. He crumpled to the ground as ranch hands rushed forward to subdue the animal. Without thinking, Lillian gathered her skirts and ran toward the scene. Oscar was already kneeling beside his employer, his weathered face grave. "He's breathing, but that hoof caught him hard," the foreman reported as Lillian dropped to her knees beside Vaughn's unconscious form. "Could be broken ribs, maybe worse." "Get him to the house," Lillian commanded, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Carefully. I'll send for the doctor." The next hours passed in a blur as Vaughn was carried to his bedroom. Blood stained his shirt where the hoof had torn skin along with bruising his ribs. The doctor, a gruff older man named Parker, arrived from town and confirmed 3 broken ribs, a nasty gash that required stitches, and a concussion. "He'll need complete rest for at least a week," Dr. Parker instructed as he packed his bag. "Keep him still, even if he argues. That concussion is nothing to trifle with." "I'll see to it," Lillian promised. She established herself in Vaughn's room, alternating watches with Mrs. Caldwell. For 2 days he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering incoherently. Lillian bathed his face with cool cloths when fever set in, changed his bandages, and spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. On the 3rd night, Lillian was dozing in a chair beside his bed when his voice, weak but clear, startled her awake. "You're still here." She leaned forward, relief flooding through her. "Of course I am. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a horse." A ghost of his usual wry expression crossed his features, which I suppose is accurate. Lillian helped him sip water. "Dr. Parker says you're fortunate. The stallion could have killed you. Midnight has always been temperamental." He winced as he shifted position. "You've been caring for me all this time. Mrs. Caldwell and I have taken turns." He caught her hand as she turned to replace the water glass. His skin was fever-warm against hers. "Thank you, Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in his tone made her breath catch. "You should rest, Mr. Whitaker." "Vaughn," he corrected softly. After what you've done, I think we can dispense with formalities, at least in private." His recovery progressed steadily over the next days. Lillian found herself spending more time than strictly necessary in his company, reading to him from his collection of leather-bound classics, when restlessness made him irritable, discussing books, and eventually sharing stories from their respective childhoods. She learned that Vaughn had inherited the ranch at 23 when his father died, that his mother had abandoned them when he was just 10, that he had built the operation from near bankruptcy to one of the region's most successful ranches through sheer determination. "Everyone said I was too young, too inexperienced," he told her one evening as sunset painted the room in golden light. "I had to be twice as tough, twice as demanding as any other rancher to earn respect." "Is that why you cultivated your fearsome reputation?" A wry smile touched his lips. "Is that how you see me? Fearsome?" "I did," she admitted. "At first. And now," Lillian busied herself straightening his already neat blankets. "Now I see a man who works harder than anyone, who cares deeply about this land and the people who depend on him, even if he doesn't show it openly." Something vulnerable flashed in his gray eyes before he looked away. "You give me too much credit." As Vaughn recovered enough to leave his bed, their relationship settled into a new pattern, still employer and employee, but with an undercurrent of something more, something neither seemed ready to acknowledge. August arrived with brutal heat, the air shimmering above the parched landscape. Lillian was in the kitchen garden one morning, gathering the last of the summer vegetables, when a rider approached at a gallop. She shaded her eyes, recognizing the horse before the man Thomas's done gelding. Her brother dismounted in a cloud of dust, his expression thunderous as he strode toward her. "There you are, little sister, looking well-fed and content while I struggle to keep our farm." Lillian stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thomas, what brings you here? What do you think?" "Money, of course." He grabbed her arm roughly. "Whitaker's been working you for months. Surely he's reduced my debt by now." "Let go of me," Lillian said quietly, trying to pull away. "Mr. Whitaker isn't here. He rode out at dawn to check the north pasture. Convenient." Thomas's fingers dug painfully into her flesh. "Then you can show me where he keeps his safe. I know he has one, every successful rancher does." Horror dawned as Lillian realized her brother's intention. "You can't be serious. You're talking about stealing." "I prefer to think of it as accelerating the debt repayment." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now be a good girl and show me to his office." "I will do no such thing." Lillian jerked free of his grasp. "Leave now, Thomas, before you make an even bigger mistake." Her brother's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand to strike her, but the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked froze him mid-motion. "I'd reconsider that if I were you, Sutton." Vaughn's voice was deadly calm. He sat astride his black gelding, rifle aimed squarely at Thomas's chest. "Whitaker," Thomas lowered his hand slowly. "Just paying a brotherly visit, no harm meant." "Is that so?" Vaughn dismounted, keeping the rifle trained on Thomas. "Miss Sutton, are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." Lillian moved away from her brother, unconsciously stepping closer to Vaughn. "I heard enough of your conversation to know your intentions," Vaughn said, his voice hard. "You came to rob me and you were willing to hurt your sister to do it." Thomas's face paled. "It was just talk. I wouldn't actually save it for the sheriff." Vaughn cut him off. "Oscar." He called, and the foreman appeared from the direction of the barn. "Escort Mr. Sutton to town and explain to Sheriff Miller what he attempted here today." "You can't do this," Thomas protested as Oscar relieved him of his gun and roughly guided him toward his horse. "Lillian, tell him." "Tell him I was just upset." Lillian stood silent, a curious numbness spreading through her. This was her brother, her blood, but in this moment he was a stranger, someone she no longer recognized. "Take him away," Vaughn ordered, and Oscar complied, leading a still protesting Thomas toward town. When they were gone, Lillian's composure finally cracked. She sank onto a nearby bench, trembling. "Are you truly unharmed?" Vaughn asked, setting aside his rifle to sit beside her. "Yes." She stared at her hands. "I never thought. He's my brother, but I don't know who that man was just now." "Desperation changes people," Vaughn said quietly. "Brings out the worst in them. Will the sheriff keep him long? Attempted robbery carries a prison sentence, but without witnesses besides us." Vaughn sighed. "He'll likely spend a few weeks in jail before being released. I'll make certain he understands what will happen if he returns." Lillian nodded, a single tear escaping despite her efforts. Vaughn hesitantly reached out, brushing it away with his thumb. The gentle touch broke something inside her, and more tears followed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize." His hand lingered on her cheek. "You're not responsible for his actions." "He's the reason I'm here," she reminded him. "Working to pay his debt." Vaughn was silent for a long moment. "Would you leave if you could, if the debt were considered paid?" The question caught her off guard. Would she? 6 months ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal yes. But now? "I don't know," she answered honestly. Something shifted in Vaughn's eyes, hope perhaps, quickly masked by his usual reserve. "You should rest. Today has been difficult." That night, Lillian lay awake long after the house had grown quiet, her thoughts in turmoil. Thomas's behavior had shattered her last illusions about family loyalty, but more disturbing was her realization about Whitaker Ranch. Somehow this place had become home, and Vaughn demanding, complex, increasingly gentle Vaughn had become central to her happiness. The following weeks brought subtle changes. Vaughn sought her company more frequently, asking her opinion on ranch matters, sharing meals with her rather than dining alone. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with a tenderness that made her heart race. September brought the annual county fair in Carson City. To Lillian's surprise, Vaughn announced his intention to attend and invited her to accompany him. "It would be good for you to have a day away from the ranch," he said over breakfast, "unless you'd rather not be seen in public with your employer." "I'd be delighted to attend," Lillian replied, trying to ignore Mrs. Caldwell's knowing smile from across the kitchen. The day of the fair dawned clear and cool. Lillian wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, which she left partially down, confined only by tortoiseshell combs. When she descended the stairs, Vaughn was waiting in the foyer, and the appreciation in his eyes as he looked at her sent warmth flooding through her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The fair was a whirl of activity: livestock exhibitions, craft displays, food vendors, and a small carnival with games of skill and chance. Vaughn seemed transformed away from the ranch, laughing more freely, his hand often finding the small of her back as he guided her through the crowds. "Look," he said, pointing to a shooting gallery. "Shall I win you a prize?" Lillian watched in admiration as he hit every target with precise accuracy, earning them a small porcelain figurine of a horse that bore a striking resemblance to his black gelding. "A memento of the day," he said, placing it in her hands. As evening approached, a makeshift dance floor had been set up in the town square. A small band struck up a lively tune and couples began to gather. "Would you care to dance?" Vaughn asked, surprising her with his outstretched hand. "People will talk," she warned, even as she placed her fingers in his. "Let them." His smile held a challenge. "I've never much cared for public opinion." The music carried them across the floor, his arm strong around her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. Lillian was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the clean scent of his shaving soap, of how perfectly she fit against him. They were midway through their second dance, when a commotion near the edge of the square caught their attention. Raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. "Whitaker!" The slurred shout cut through the music. Thomas stood swaying at the edge of the dance floor, clearly intoxicated, a broken bottle in his hand. Stealing my sister wasn't enough, had to parade her around town too. "Thomas, stop!" Lillian stepped forward, but Vaughn pulled her behind him protectively. "You're drunk, Sutton," Vaughn said evenly. "Go home before you do something you'll regret." "Regret?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Like trusting you with my sister." "She was supposed to work off my debt, not warm your bed." Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Lillian felt her face burn with humiliation. "You've said enough." Vaughn's voice was dangerously quiet. "Apologize to your sister and leave." "Or what?" Thomas staggered forward, brandishing the broken bottle. "You going to shoot me like you threatened before? Go ahead. Show everyone what kind of man really runs Whitaker Ranch." Several men moved to restrain Thomas, but not before he lunged forward, the jagged glass slashing toward Vaughn. Lillian screamed a warning, but Vaughn was already moving, deflecting the blow with his forearm. Blood immediately soaked his white shirt sleeve as the sheriff and his deputy finally subdued Thomas. "Vaughn!" Lillian rushed to his side as Thomas was dragged away, still shouting obscenities. "You're bleeding." "It's not deep," he assured her, though his face had paled. "Just a scratch." The town doctor disagreed, stitching the wound closed in his office while Lillian waited anxiously in the adjacent room. When Vaughn emerged, his arm bandaged and in a sling, his expression was grim. "Sheriff says your brother will be locked up for a good while this time," he told her as they walked to where their buggy waited. "Assault with a deadly weapon isn't something he can overlook." "I'm so sorry," Lillian whispered. "This is all my fault." "How do you figure that?" Vaughn helped her into the buggy one-handed, then climbed up beside her. "If I hadn't agreed to come today, if I'd been firmer with Thomas from the beginning—" "Stop." Vaughn's good hand covered hers. "Your brother made his choices long before today. None of this is on your shoulders." They rode in silence for several miles, the stars emerging above them in the clear night sky. Finally, Vaughn spoke again. "What he said about you warming my bed, you know people will believe it now." Lillian stared at her hands. "Yes, your reputation doesn't matter to me." She looked up at him then. "Not as much as your well-being." Something changed in Vaughn's expression, a softening, a yielding. "When I saw him coming at me with that bottle, all I could think was that I needed to keep you safe, that I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt." "Vaughn." "I've been fighting this for months," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Telling myself it was inappropriate, that I had no right to feel this way about someone in your position. But tonight, when I held you while we danced, I can't pretend anymore." Lillian's heart hammered in her chest. "Feel what way?" Instead of answering, he reined the horses to a stop, set the brake, and turned to face her fully in the moonlight. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood in my study and refused to be cowed by my coldness." Joy burst through Lillian like sunrise. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you taught me to balance the ledgers and didn't make me feel foolish for not knowing how." Vaughn's laugh was soft and wondering. "We've wasted so much time." "Not wasted," she corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "Just preparing." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Your contract," he murmured. "I'll tear it up tomorrow. You're not bound to me by your brother's debt any longer. And if I want to stay anyway," his smile was luminous in the darkness, "then we'll need to discuss new terms entirely." They returned to the ranch well past midnight, the household already asleep. At the foot of the stairs, Vaughn kissed her hand formally. Good night, Lillian. We'll talk tomorrow. Sleep came easily for the first time in months, her dreams filled with dancing and moonlight kisses. Lillian woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of raised voices below. Hurriedly dressing, she followed the commotion to Vaughn's study, where Oscar stood reporting something that had Vaughn's face set in grim lines. "What's happened?" she asked from the doorway. Both men turned. Vaughn's expression softened at the sight of her, but tension remained in the set of his shoulders. Thomas escaped custody last night. Apparently he had help from some unsavory associates. Dread pooled in Lillian's stomach. "Is he coming here?" "We don't know," Oscar answered. "Sheriff's forming a search party. Thought you should be warned, boss. Double the guards on the property," Vaughn ordered. "No one rides alone until he's recaptured." When Oscar had gone, Vaughn crossed to Lillian, taking her hands in his. "I don't want you to worry. He'd be a fool to show his face here again. Thomas hasn't been making wise decisions lately," she reminded him. Vaughn's thumb traced soothing circles on her palm. "I won't let him harm you. I promise." Despite Vaughn's assurances, the day passed under a cloud of apprehension. Extra hands patrolled the property boundaries, and Vaughn kept his rifle close at hand. By evening, with no sign of Thomas, some of the tension began to ease. After dinner, Vaughn led Lillian to the parlor where a dust-covered piano stood in the corner. "You mentioned once that you play," he said, lifting the fallboard to reveal yellowed ivory keys. "Would you?" "For me," Lillian seated herself on the bench, testing the keys. The piano was out of tune but still playable. "Any requests? Something beautiful, like you." Heat rose in her cheeks as she began to play a Chopin nocturne, the music flowing from memory. Vaughn stood beside the piano, watching her with such tenderness that her fingers nearly faltered. When the piece ended, he sat beside her on the bench. "That was lovely. My mother taught me." "It was her favorite. She taught you well." His hand covered hers on the keys. "Lillian, about what I said last night. Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "Every word." His gray eyes held hers, all pretense gone. "I love you. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I fought against it. The man I was when you arrived, cold, demanding, isolated, that man didn't deserve someone like you. And now I'm trying to be worthy of the way you look at me." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I don't want you as an employee or as payment for a debt. I want you as my equal, my partner, my wife, if you'll have me." Joy blazed through her so intensely it was almost pain. "Are you proposing, Mr. Whitaker?" Inelegantly, but yes. A rare, full smile transformed his face. "Marry me, Lillian. Make this house a home. Make me a better man than I've been." "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was a promise, tender and reverent, his good arm pulling her close while his injured one remained carefully between them. Lillian gave herself to the moment completely, marveling at how her greatest fear, being sent to work for the cruel Vaughn Whitaker, had transformed into her greatest joy. The sound of breaking glass shattered their reverie. Vaughn was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Lillian and the parlor door. "Stay here," he commanded, reaching for the rifle he'd left propped against the piano. Before he could grasp it, the door burst open. Thomas stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and unkempt, a pistol in his shaking hand. "How touching," he sneered. "The mighty rancher and my whore of a sister." "Thomas, please," Lillian rose, heart pounding. "Put the gun down. Let's talk about this reasonably." "Reason?" He barked a laugh. "Was it reasonable for him to have me locked up? Was it reasonable for you to betray your own blood for this man?" "No one's betrayed you," Vaughn said calmly, though Lillian could see the tension in every line of his body. "Your sister has more than fulfilled her obligation here. Your debt is cleared." Thomas's eyes narrowed. Convenient timing, just as you decide to take her for yourself. This isn't about Vaughn, Lillian tried again. This is about you making one bad decision after another. Please let us help you. Help me, Thomas's laugh was bitter. The only help I need is the money this bastard has been hoarding while decent folk struggle. He swung the gun toward Vaughn. I came for what's mine. The combination to your safe, Whitaker. Now, Thomas, don't do this, Lillian begged. Stay out of this, Lil, her brother snapped. I'm taking what he owes me one way or another. The only thing owed here was cleared by your sister's hard work, Vaughn replied, his voice steady. Put down the gun before you add murder to your crimes. Something dark and desperate twisted Thomas's features. Always so righteous. Let's see how righteous you feel watching your woman bleed. He swung the gun toward Lillian. Several things happened simultaneously. Vaughn lunged forward, Thomas fired, and Lillian screamed as Vaughn's body jerked with the impact of the bullet. He staggered but remained standing, his good arm extended protectively. Vaughn! Lillian moved to him as Thomas, looking shocked by his own actions, backed toward the door. I'm all right, Vaughn gasped, though blood stained his shirt. Grazed my shoulder. The sound of running footsteps approached, ranch hands alerted by the gunshot. Thomas, panicked now, turned to flee but found his escape blocked by Oscar and two others, all armed. Drop it, Sutton, Oscar ordered, his rifle trained on Thomas's chest. It's over. For one terrible moment, Lillian thought her brother might choose to die fighting. Then, with a broken sob, Thomas let the pistol fall to the floor. I never meant to shoot anyone, he whispered as the men restrained him. I just wanted what was owed me. Get him out of here, Vaughn ordered, his face pale with pain. And send for the doctor. As Thomas was led away, Lillian helped Vaughn to a chair, her hands trembling as she examined his wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed his upper arm, missing his previous injury by inches. You could have been killed, she said, tears flowing freely now. Stepping in front of me like that, I'd do it again. His uninjured hand cupped her cheek. 1,000 times. The doctor arrived within the hour, pronouncing Vaughn's injury minor but recommending rest and careful monitoring for infection. Lillian sat beside his bed through the night, holding his hand, overwhelmed by how close she had come to losing everything. Marry me tomorrow, Vaughn murmured as dawn broke, his eyes still closed. Lillian smiled despite her exhaustion. You're delirious from blood loss. Perfectly lucid, he countered, opening his eyes to gaze at her. I don't want to waste another day. Preacher Stevens can be here by noon. You're in no condition for a wedding. I'm in perfect condition to make you my wife. He squeezed her hand. Unless you've reconsidered. Never. She leaned down to kiss him softly. But perhaps we could wait until you can stand without wincing. 3 days later, with Vaughn sufficiently recovered and Thomas safely in state custody awaiting trial, Lillian Sutton became Lillian Whitaker in a simple ceremony on the ranch's front porch. Mrs. Caldwell wept openly. Oscar stood proudly as Vaughn's best man, and several ranch hands and townspeople gathered to witness the union. Lillian wore a dress of pale blue silk that Vaughn had somehow arranged to have delivered from Carson City, a crown of wildflowers in her hair. Vaughn, still favoring his injured arm but standing tall and proud, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows. I never believed in second chances, he told her that night as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom. But you gave me one. Showed me there was more to life than just surviving and succeeding. You gave me a second chance too, she replied, nestled against his uninjured side. When I arrived here, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. The seasons turned, and Whitaker Ranch flourished under their joint care. Vaughn gradually softened his fearsome reputation, becoming known as firm but fair. Lillian transformed the big house into a warm home, organizing community gatherings and using her growing influence to establish the town's first proper school. Thomas, sentenced to 5 years in prison, eventually wrote letters of genuine remorse. After his release, with Lillian's cautious encouragement and Vaughn's reluctant agreement, he was given work on a distant part of the ranch where he slowly began rebuilding his life and his relationship with his sister. A year after their wedding, Lillian gave birth to a son they named James, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Catherine. Their family grew alongside their ranch, their love deepening with each passing season. On their 5th anniversary, Vaughn surprised Lillian with a new piano for the parlor that had become the heart of their home. "For the music you brought back into my life," he said, as she ran her fingers reverently over the polished keys. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out this way?" She asked that night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their children playing nearby. "When my brother first sent me here," Vaughn smiled, the sternness that had once defined him long softened by happiness. "Never. I thought I was getting a housekeeper to settle a debt. Instead, I got everything I never knew I needed." "Not exactly the cruel cowboy my brother warned me about," Lillian teased, leaning against his shoulder. "Perhaps I was," Vaughn conceded, wrapping his arm around her. "Until someone had the courage to see beyond that to the man I could be." As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared overhead, witness to the life they had built from the most unlikely beginning, a life neither could have imagined on that dust-swept day when a frightened young woman had stood before the supposed cruelest rancher in Nevada, and found, instead, the love of her lifetime.